Julie, she says, on the topic of adult children living at home, I charge my 22-year-old rent, etc., and he has agreed he can't afford to live elsewhere, even with friends. So I literally need to use his money to make it each month. Any advice with the situation? I have helped with his car costs, etc. He only gets 36 hours a week right now. What do you think, Seth?
Well, Julie, thanks for asking that question. I'll do my best to take a stab at it. I will tell you, I am not in your shoes. I am the age that many children are when they're still living at home in that situation. But I was in your son's shoes once. I was 22, 23, out of college and still living at home. I actually lived at home for about a year between when I graduated college and when I got married at 23. You've got two qualities that you can fulfill as a mother who loves Christ and loves your son. So those two qualities are equally important. They're not diametrically opposed to one another, but they are paradoxical, meaning they seem like they're contradictory when they're actually not. The two qualities are generosity and prudence. Generosity meaning being ready to give and help your son, and prudence essentially being wise about it, not helping him so much that it actually starts to harm him. So I believe, Julie, to encourage you, you're fulfilling both of these right now. You've got a 22-year-old son who's living at home. Your generosity is on display in the fact that you are giving him a place to live when he cannot afford to live anywhere else. And you're giving him a place to live at a price that he can afford. That's awesome. That's very generous. Additionally, you're also paying for his car payments. Very generous. I commend you for that. I think that's awesome. You're also exhibiting prudence in the fact that you are charging him rent, which I believe is a very, very good thing. And I'm not saying that it's a sin to have adult children at home and not charge them rent, but I would encourage you, as long as he is living with you in this situation, I would continue to charge him rent. Not saying you got to be stingy about it, not saying you have to increase it to the same degree that apartment complexes would. They would go out the wazoo. They'd increase it crazy every year or every couple months. You don't need to do that. You can keep it the same level. I think that's totally fine. But I think charging him rent is going to be good for him in the long run, because it kind of keeps that fire lit behind him for him to be able to say, okay, I got to keep earning income so I can afford to live where I'm living in this deal that I have for my parents. Here's what I've learned, both from my experience and from looking at other people as well. It is a good and biblical trait to treat your children as children and to treat men as men. But you have a 22-year-old son who I assume is out of college. Maybe he's not, but he's working and he's almost working full time. He's making money. He is a man. So it's good for you to treat him like a man. So you're not letting him live in your home rent free. You're being generous, to be sure, but you are treating him as a man. That's a good thing. Paul says, when I was a child, I lived like a child, acted like a child, talked like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. For his sake, treat him like a man while he's living under your roof. Across the board, generally, it's a good idea for the adult children to pay rent. If they're out of the schooling age, so if they've graduated high school, let's say, and they've got a full-time job, I think it's good to start paying rent. If they've graduated college, so maybe in college, they're still full-time, so they don't pay rent while they're in college. But once they graduate college, they get a full-time job, time to start paying rent. Unless there is an emergency circumstance. And I want to be very clear, you have opportunity to be generous, to not be stingy. I think that's great. If there's an emergency circumstance, an unexpected death, an illness in the family, if, God forbid, my house burned down or something like that, I would hope that my parents or Megan's parents would be willing to take us in for the time being and not make us pay rent while we're trying to get back on our feet again. But I think generally speaking, it's a good idea if you have adult children living at home to have them pay rent, because they are, after all, adults. Now, I'd say this, Julie. I would encourage you to give him every opportunity while he's there living under your roof to figure it out on his own, okay? Give him every opportunity. It's an act of love for him. You're not trying to be annoying. You're not trying to say, you got to get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. You're being annoying. Don't do any of that. But give him the opportunities as his mother to help him support himself. And eventually the goal is that he can support himself and then he can also support a wife and children. The first step might be this, and I would ask you to consider this. I'm not saying you have to do this, but consider doing this. Consider having a conversation with him and consider the first thing being stopping helping him pay his car payments. That could be the first thing that could go. If you tell him, hey, I want you to keep living here as long as you need, not going to raise the rent, but I want you to figure out how to pay for these car costs on your own. And if you can't, then to maybe figure out a different mode of transportation that you can afford. But have a conversation with him. Say, hey, this is what I see. I think this could be a good step. What do you think about this? Let's try to do this. The next step, possibly after this, if he is okay with this and he does this, would be to maybe help him find more work. You said he only works for 36 hours. So he's not technically full-time, although he's close to it. Might be good to help him find a part-time job that can supplement that. And then the last thing I would tell you is a timetable. So the first step would be have a conversation about cutting off the car payments. The second step would be help him to maybe figure out ways that he can start making more money, either with another job or a proposal at his current job to make more money or get more hours. The last step is a timetable. And similarly to what I had mentioned with Joe earlier with loaning money to someone and having a timetable to pay it back if they insist on paying it back, both for him and for yourself, this will save you a headache. Maybe just set a deadline for when he will be out of the house. It doesn't have to be hard and fast. You can have grace with it. And it also doesn't have to be a fixed date. It could be a life stage. So maybe the deadline could be, hey, when you get that raise, we're going to start looking for another place for you. Or when you get that full-time job, we're going to look for another place for you. If that's a little too ambiguous, I would tell you not the worst thing in the world would be to say maybe 6 months from now. You have to figure it out. However you can. If it's with a roommate, if you've got more hours at your job, if you picked up another job. Just speaking from experience, Julie, as a young man, I'm still a young man and I was 22 once and living at home. And by the way, I was not forced to pay rent, and I'm so grateful for my parents for that. I wish that I had still paid something because I think it would have taught me the value of paying for the place that you're living in. I think it's really good.